Caleb Turner was a man who spoke little but noticed everything. People in the small western town often said he was the kind of rancher who could hear a horse's breathing change from 10 steps away or see a loose fence post from the corner of his eye. He lived alone on a wide piece of land, where the mornings began with the call of birds and the evenings ended with quiet wind. His life was simple, steady, and calm, and he believed it would always stay that way. One warm afternoon, Caleb rode into the trading post with a list in his pocket. He needed salt, nails, flour, and a few spare tools. He expected nothing unusual. The trading post was always a small, busy place where people talked about weather, crops, and news from the next town. Caleb tied his horse outside and walked in, nodding politely to the owner. He was checking the shelves when he heard a voice from the back of the store, soft, shaking, but strong in a quiet way. He didn't mean to listen, but the walls were thin, and the voice carried through the room. "Father, please. You're deciding my whole life without asking me," the girl said. Caleb froze for a moment. There was something painful but brave in those words. He wasn't the kind of man who leaned into other people's private matters, but this voice held honesty he couldn't ignore. A deeper, rougher voice answered. It belonged to an older man. "Elena, I am doing what is best for you. The arrangement is final. You will marry him, and that's the end of it." Caleb didn't move, pretending to check the price tag on a farming tool, but his ears stayed alert. He wasn't listening because of curiosity. Something in the girl's voice made him feel concern he had no right to feel yet. The girl, Elena, as her father called her, spoke again. "I don't know him. I've met him only once," she said in a trembling voice. "Why must I be sent away? Why can't I stay and work? Why can't I choose my own future?" Her father sighed loudly, the sound full of impatience. "Because life is not about what you want, Elena. You'll understand one day." Caleb could almost picture her standing there, small and tired, fighting a battle she had already lost. He heard her take a slow breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "Father, I'm not asking to be free from you. I just want a say in my own life." Her father didn't respond with understanding. Instead, he muttered something sharp and final. A moment later, footsteps moved toward the front of the store. Caleb quickly stepped aside to avoid looking like he was eavesdropping. The father passed him with an annoyed expression, his boots pounding against the wooden floor. He pushed the door open and let it slam behind him. Caleb watched him leave, then glanced toward the back of the store. Elena stood alone, holding a small bag of sewing supplies against her chest. She wasn't crying loudly. She wasn't the type who let emotions spill everywhere. Instead, she stood calmly, but her eyes were red and tired. She looked like someone carrying more weight than she could handle. Caleb didn't know what to say, or if he should say anything at all. He wasn't used to stepping into other people's troubles, but when Elena noticed him standing there, she quickly brushed a tear from her cheek and gave him a polite nod. "I'm sorry if we disturbed you," she said softly. Her voice was gentle, almost apologetic, as if she was the one who had done something wrong. "You didn't disturb anything," Caleb replied. His voice was deep but calm. "I didn't hear much." He said it to comfort her, though he had heard more than enough to understand her sadness. Elena tried to smile. It wasn't a full smile, just a small lift at the corner of her mouth, but it carried dignity. She thanked the shopkeeper, paid for her items, and walked out the door. Caleb watched her leave. Something about her stayed with him, the quiet strength in her words, the way she tried to stay composed, and the loneliness that hid behind her small smile. He finished buying his supplies and stepped outside. Elena was already walking away from the store, her father far ahead of her. She walked slowly, as if every step took effort. Caleb didn't know her, yet he felt a strange pull, something like worry for someone he had just met. He rode home on his horse, but her voice kept replaying in his mind. "My father is deciding my whole life." Caleb wasn't a man who liked seeing anyone pushed into a corner, especially someone who looked as gentle and hard-working as Elena. He tried to shake the thought off, but it stayed with him, bothering him in a quiet, persistent way. That evening, back at the ranch, he worked like usual. He fixed a fence, fed the animals, and checked the water troughs. but his mind wasn't fully there. Every so often, he remembered Elena standing alone in that shop, holding her sewing supplies like a shield. Later, as the sun set behind the hills, he sat outside with a cup of warm coffee, watching the sky change colors. He tried to focus on the peaceful land, the soft breeze, the steady rhythm of his ranch, things that usually calmed him, but his thoughts returned to the young woman he'd overheard. He didn't know why the moment had affected him so much. Maybe it was because she hadn't shouted or argued. She had used calm words, even while facing something painful. Caleb respected people who stayed steady when life tested them. And she had shown that strength. The next morning, while he saddled his horse, he wondered if he would see her again. It was strange. He wasn't usually curious about strangers. But Elena didn't feel like a stranger anymore. She felt like someone he needed to understand better, not in a bold or personal way, but in a quiet way that fit his nature. 2 days passed. Caleb stayed busy repairing fences and clearing fallen branches after a recent windstorm. He tried to forget about the incident at the trading post, but every time he paused his work, her voice echoed again. "You're deciding my whole life without asking me." He wondered what kind of life she lived, what dreams she held, and why her father couldn't see the fear behind her brave words. On the 3rd day, Caleb decided to go into town again, even though he didn't urgently need to. He told himself he wanted to check on a new shipment of tools, but the truth was, something else. He wanted to see if Elena was all right. He didn't have a reason to interfere, but he hoped she had found peace. He reached the same trading post and walked inside. This time, there was no argument, no tense voices, no sign of Elena or her father. The shopkeeper greeted him with a friendly smile. "Looking for anything in particular today?" the shopkeeper asked. "Just checking for that tool shipment," Caleb replied. As he browsed, he glanced around quietly, hoping to see the girl again. But she wasn't there. He didn't ask about her. He didn't want to seem intrusive, but he couldn't help feeling a small worry inside him. He bought a few supplies and stepped outside. The sun was high, and a warm breeze passed through town. Caleb untied his horse, but before climbing onto the saddle, he paused. Something in his instincts told him this wasn't the end of their paths crossing. He didn't know how or when, but he felt it deep inside. The world had a strange way of bringing people together when they needed it most. For now, all he had was the memory of a young woman standing alone, whispering for a chance at her own future. Caleb Turner rode home with a thoughtful look in his eyes, unaware that the small moment he overheard would soon change the direction of both of their lives in ways neither of them expected. Caleb didn't know that he would see Elena again so soon. Days had passed quietly on his ranch, and he tried to keep his mind on work, but every now and then, her soft voice returned to him. He wondered if she was all right, if her father had given her any space, and if she was still being forced toward a future she didn't choose. These thoughts circled in his mind even when he tried focusing on feeding cattle or mending fences. One late afternoon, he decided to ride toward town again, to check the creek water level and pick up a few supplies. It was a warm day, but a strange tension hung in the air, the kind that usually came before a storm. As he followed the dirt trail toward the main road, something ahead caught his attention. A wagon stood tilted on one side, one of its wheels broken sharply at the edge. Crates lay scattered on the ground, and 2 horses looked tired and confused. Standing beside the wagon was Elena, holding the reins while trying to lift a heavy box back onto the wagon. Her small frame leaned with all her strength, but the crate barely moved. Just a few feet away from her stood her father, scolding her loudly. Caleb slowed his horse and watched for a moment. Elena struggled but kept silent, trying to obey without arguing. The father waved his hands angrily, pointing at the broken wheel as if she had caused the accident. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen people struggle with work before, but there was something different here. Elena didn't look weak, she looked overwhelmed, like someone carrying far more weight than she should. He rode closer and called out in a calm voice, "Need some help?" Elena looked up quickly, surprise flashing in her eyes. She seemed relieved to see him but tried not to show too much emotion. Her father, however, frowned deeply. "We don't need any help," the man said sharply. Caleb dismounted quietly, ignoring the man's tone. He walked toward the fallen crate and lifted it as if it weighed almost nothing. Elena stepped back, startled by how easily he handled it. She whispered, "Thank you," barely letting her father hear. Caleb placed the crate carefully in the wagon and inspected the broken wheel. "Your wheel pin is loose," he said. "It snapped when the wagon hit that rock." He pointed to a large stone half buried in the dusty trail. Her father crossed his arms. "And what? You want to fix it for us?" Caleb stayed calm. "It's better to fix it properly than risk the horses pulling against a broken axle." Elena watched him with a quiet expression, part gratitude, part exhaustion. Her father muttered something under his breath but stepped aside. Caleb knelt near the wheel, removed the broken piece, and pulled out a spare pin he always carried. It took him only a few minutes to repair it. While he worked, the father continued complaining, mostly at Elena. He scolded her for walking too slowly, for not tying a crate properly, for letting the horses rest too long. Caleb didn't like the tone, but he said nothing yet. He simply finished the repair, dusted his hands, and checked the wheel one more time to make sure it was steady. When he stood up, he noticed Elena looking at him with a soft, grateful expression. She looked tired, very tired, but her eyes still held that quiet strength he'd seen before. "Thank you for helping," she said again, a bit louder this time. "You're welcome," he replied gently. Her father grunted. "We could have managed." Caleb didn't argue. He simply walked to the horses, gave them some water from his canteen, and checked their harnesses. He could see Elena watching him, as if she wasn't used to someone helping without expecting something in return. Once the wagon was ready, Caleb stepped back. Elena's father snapped the reins, and the horses moved forward. Elena turned once, and gave Caleb a small nod before the wagon disappeared down the trail. Caleb stood there for a moment, watching the dust settle. He didn't know her story fully, but he understood one thing clearly. Elena lived under pressure, and she didn't deserve the weight placed on her shoulders. He returned to the creek, filled his canteen, and rode to town. But everywhere he went that day, he heard whispers, small pieces of news carried by the townsfolk. Some said Elena's father was sending her away soon. Others said a businessman from another town had already made arrangements. Some even said Elena was frightened but had no power to stop it. Caleb listened quietly, saying nothing, but each rumor dug deeper into his thoughts. He didn't know much about the businessman, but the way people talked about him made Caleb uneasy. The man was known for wanting things done quickly and his way, without caring who got hurt in the process. Caleb tried to push these thoughts aside, but every time he remembered Elena struggling to lift that crate while her father yelled at her, his heart tightened again. As the sun set, he headed back home. The sky was painted orange and pink, but Caleb felt no peace that evening. He kept seeing Elena's tired face, the frustration in her father's voice, and the rumors he had heard in town. He spent the next day working around his ranch, but even the steady rhythm of chores didn't calm his mind. He kept wondering why Elena's father didn't see the goodness in his own daughter. She clearly worked hard, obeyed him, and tried her best. Yet he treated her like she was a burden, not a person with her own hopes and fears. Late in the afternoon, Caleb sat by the fence and watched the sky darken. Birds flew overhead, and distant hills glowed in soft evening light. But none of it eased his worry. He felt something coming, something that would test him, test her, and maybe test the whole town. He didn't know why he felt responsible. Elena was not his family. She wasn't part of his life before that day in the trading post, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that she needed help. Not from anyone, but from someone who would listen to her voice instead of silencing it. 2 days later, the tension he felt became real. A young boy from town rode across Caleb's land, shouting for help. His horse was running fast, and his face was pale with worry. "Caleb! Caleb! They can't find Elena!" the boy yelled. Caleb's heart dropped. He went still for a moment, like the world had paused. Then he stepped forward urgently. "What do you mean they can't find her?" he asked. "She ran off after a big argument with her father," the boy said. "A storm's coming. They think she's somewhere near the hills." Caleb didn't wait another second. He grabbed his saddle, tightened the straps, and mounted his horse. His usually calm face hardened with determination. The boy pointed toward the hills, and Caleb rode off immediately. He didn't know exactly what he would find, but he knew one thing clearly. He wasn't going to let anything happen to her. Not while he had the strength to help. The sky began to darken, and a cold wind swept across the valley. Caleb leaned forward, urging his horse to move faster. Elena was out there somewhere alone, scared and lost, and he was going to find her, no matter what it took. The wind grew stronger as Caleb rode toward the hills, carrying the smell of rain and the sound of distant thunder. Dark clouds gathered above, slowly swallowing the evening light. He pushed his horse to move faster, his jaw tight and his eyes scanning every path, every dip in the land. He did not know exactly where Elena had gone, but he trusted his instincts. Something told him she wouldn't choose the main road. She would choose a quiet trail, somewhere she could be alone with her thoughts. The first drops of rain hit his shoulders like small, cold stones. He pulled his hat lower to keep his eyes clear. The hills rose ahead, silent and shadowed, and the sky above them looked almost black. Caleb knew the storm would be rough. He also knew Elena had no shelter, no warm coat, and no one with her. The thought made him ride harder. He reached a fork in the trail. One path led to the river, the other toward a cluster of tall rocks where people sometimes rested during long journeys. Caleb paused only a second before turning toward the rocks. Elena didn't seem like someone who would walk toward town or toward noisy places. She would look for quiet, for shade, for distance from arguments. As he rode, he spotted fresh footprints in the soft ground, small ones, made by boots that were too light for a man's. His heart gave a small jump. He leaned down in the saddle, studying them. They matched Elena's size. The tracks led deeper into the hills. Good, he thought. She was close. But then he noticed something else. The prints became uneven, like she had stumbled more than once. The rain had started falling harder, quickly washing away the edges of the tracks, but enough remained for him to follow. Caleb guided his horse carefully, calling Elena's name now and then. His voice echoed between the rocks but returned unanswered. The deeper he went, the stronger the wind became. Lightning flashed far away, followed by rolling thunder that shook the air. He stopped his horse near a narrow path that dipped into a shallow valley. There, branches were broken, and small stones were disturbed as if someone had slipped. He dismounted and knelt to inspect the ground. The tracks were faint but still visible. "Elena," he called again, louder this time. Only the wind answered. He started walking along the trail, holding the reins tightly so his horse wouldn't wander off. Soon, he reached an area where a large tree had fallen long ago, creating a natural shelter beneath its angled trunk. The space underneath was dry enough to protect someone from rain. And there she was. Elena sat curled against the fallen trunk, holding her arms around herself for warmth. Her clothes were wet from the storm. Her hair stuck to her face, and her shoulders trembled. But when she heard footsteps, she looked up quickly. Her eyes widened in relief. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice weak and tired. He hurried toward her, kneeling beside her. "Elena, are you hurt?" She shook her head slowly. "Just cold and tired." He removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders without hesitation. The heavy fabric warmed her quickly, and she let out a shaky breath. "What happened?" he asked gently. Elena lowered her head, staring at the muddy ground. "I couldn't stay. Not after what Father said." Her voice cracked, and she closed her eyes for a moment. "He told me I had 2 days left. 2 days before I would be sent away. To a man I barely know. Henri Don. Henri Donry." Caleb listened quietly. He didn't interrupt. "I told him I wasn't ready," she continued softly. "I told him I didn't want that life. He got angry. Said I was ungrateful. Said I had no right to question him." She swallowed, her throat tight. "So I left before I said something worse." She took a shaky breath. "I didn't know it would storm. I just wanted space to think." Caleb nodded slowly. Anyone would need space after that. Elena looked up at him with eyes full of fear and exhaustion. I don't want to be forced into something I don't choose. I want to work. I want to live honestly. I want a chance to build a life I understand. Caleb heard every word clearly, and something inside him felt both heavy and protective. She wasn't running away from work or duty. She was running away from a decision being forced upon her. That was different, deeply different. He placed a hand near hers, not touching, but close enough to show he was there for her. You're safe now. But we need to get you out of this storm before it gets worse. Fact. Lightning flashed again, closer this time. The wind whistled through the rocks, blowing cold air under the fallen tree. Elena gathered the coat tighter around herself. Caleb helped her stand. She wobbled slightly, her legs stiff from sitting too long in the cold. He steadied her with a gentle arm around her shoulder, guiding her toward his horse. You'll ride, he said. I'll walk beside you. But the storm, she began. I can handle it, he replied simply. He lifted her onto the horse carefully, making sure the coat wrapped fully around her. Then he took the reins and started leading the horse down the trail. Rain poured heavily now, soaking his shirt and running into his boots, but he didn't care. His attention stayed on Elena, who looked down at him with grateful, tired eyes. Every few minutes, he checked on her, asking if she was warm enough or if she needed to stop. She shook her head each time, trusting him completely. As they neared the bottom of the hill, a figure appeared on the trail, holding a lantern. It was Elena's father. His face was red from anger and worry, and the lantern shook in his hand. When he saw Caleb walking beside the horse, and Elena sitting on it, his expression hardened. There you are, he shouted. Do you know what trouble you've caused, girl? Elena flinched, shrinking slightly. Caleb stepped forward, placing himself between her and her father. His voice stayed level, but there was steel in it. She was alone in the storm, Caleb said. She could have been hurt. I found her cold and scared. This isn't the time to raise your voice. Her father glared at Caleb. This is between me and my daughter. Caleb didn't move. Not tonight. It isn't. The wind howled, and thunder cracked through the sky, reminding them how dangerous the storm was. Elena spoke softly from the horse. Father, I wasn't trying to run away forever. I just needed time. I just needed you to hear me. Her father looked at her, his face tight with emotion, anger mixed with fear, pride mixed with confusion. For a moment, he said nothing. Caleb waited silently, his expression steady. Finally, her father exhaled sharply. We'll talk at home, he said. But not here. He turned and started walking back toward his own land, expecting Elena to follow. Caleb looked up at her. I'll take you back safely. Elena nodded. As they continued down the trail, Caleb walked beside her, ready to catch her if she slipped, ready to speak up again if her father raised his voice too sharply. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. He was no longer just a witness. He had stepped into her life the moment he chose to search for her, and nothing would be the same after tonight. The storm faded slowly through the night, but its noise stayed in Caleb's mind long after the clouds passed. He didn't sleep much. He kept thinking about Elena, about how cold she had been, how tired she looked, and how her voice trembled when she spoke about her father's decision. Even after bringing her back home, Caleb couldn't rest. He paced across his quiet ranch house, replaying every moment. The next morning, the world looked washed and bright, as if nothing bad had happened the night before. But Caleb knew the storm inside Elena's home was far from over. He saddled his horse again and rode toward town, not planning to interfere but unable to stay still. As he neared the main road, he spotted a few townsfolk gathered near the well, whispering with serious faces. When they saw him, some nodded respectfully, others exchanged glances, as if they knew more than he did. Caleb stopped his horse and asked, "Everything all right?" One older woman stepped forward. "It's Elena's father," she said. "He came into town angry this morning. He says Elena is becoming impossible, He says someone's filling her head with nonsense. Caleb kept his expression calm but felt a knot tighten in his chest. Did she say anything? Yes, the woman answered softly. She told the sheriff that she wants a say in her own life. She didn't speak loudly, but she spoke clearly. Caleb felt a quiet pride for her. What did the sheriff say? He asked. The sheriff said she has the right to decide for herself once she's of age, and she's almost there. But her father isn't listening. He left town angrily and said he would handle things his own way. Scoop, Caleb thanked the woman and rode away slowly. He didn't want to assume the worst, but he also couldn't ignore the alarm growing inside him. Later that day, he rode near Elena's homestead. Not close enough to intrude, but close enough to see if anything seemed wrong. The yard was quiet. The door slightly open. The horses tied strangely unevenly. Something felt off. He waited a while, hoping to see Elena come outside, but no one appeared. Just as Caleb was about to turn back, he heard a familiar voice call from behind. Caleb. His heart jumped. Elena stood near the fence. Her clothes simple. Her hair tied back. But her face looked different today. There was determination in her eyes. Soft, but strong. He approached her slowly, respectful of her space. Are you all right? She nodded. Yes. I needed to step outside for a moment. He studied her face carefully. Did things go badly this morning? Elena let out a tired breath. Father was angry when I spoke to the sheriff. He said I embarrassed him. He doesn't understand why I want to make choices for myself. Caleb didn't interrupt her. He thinks choosing my own future means disrespecting him, she continued. But I'm not trying to hurt him. I'm just trying to live without fear. Her words were simple, but they carried a lifetime of weight. Caleb leaned gently on the fence. You showed courage by speaking up. That's not disrespect. That's honesty. She looked down at her hands. I've never done anything like that before. My father has always made every decision. But after the storm, after last night, I realized I can't stay silent anymore. Oh, Caleb nodded, feeling that same quiet pride for her again. You shouldn't. Before she could reply, the front door of the house slammed open. Her father stepped out, his face tight and frustrated. There you are, he snapped. Get inside. We're not finished talking. Elena straightened, nervous but not trembling this time. She looked at Caleb for just a second. Then she walked toward her father. Caleb stayed where he was, not wanting to make things harder for her. But he didn't leave either. Something told him he might be needed again. Elena stopped a few steps from her father. Father, she said quietly, I'm not a child. I want you to listen this time. Her father frowned, ready to argue, but Elena continued before he could. I'll work. I'll help on the farm. I'll do everything I've always done. But I won't be sent away to someone I don't know. That is my decision. Her father threw a frustrated hand in the air. Who put these ideas in your head? That rancher? That stranger? You never spoke like this before. Caleb remained still, though he felt anger stir inside him. He didn't want trouble, but he wouldn't accept being blamed for giving Elena courage she already had. Elena shook her head firmly. No. Caleb didn't tell me to say anything. He just helped me when I needed help. That's all. Her father stared at her, his expression slowly shifting from blame to confusion. For the first time, he looked unsure rather than angry. Elena, he said, quieter now. I want what's best for you. Then listen to what I want, she replied softly. Please. The silence that followed was heavy. Her father looked at her as if seeing her differently for the first time, not as a child who needed teaching, but as a young woman trying to stand on her own feet. Finally, he shook his head and walked back inside without saying another word. Elena let out a long breath, and when she turned back toward Caleb, he saw both relief and fear in her eyes. Caleb stepped closer, but not too close. That took courage, he said. More than most people will ever show. She touched the fence lightly, grounding herself. It didn't feel like courage. It felt like something I had to do before I lost myself completely. You didn't lose yourself, he replied. You found your voice. Her eyes softened. Thank you. For being there when everything felt heavy. Caleb nodded slightly. You don't owe me thanks. I just didn't want you to be alone in the storm. Elena looked around the yard, then back at him. I don't know what's going to happen next. But I feel stronger now. Not because someone saved me, but because someone listened. Caleb felt something warm settle in his chest at her words. He didn't say anything more. He knew the moment didn't need extra words. Over the next few days, Elena helped around her home with a quiet confidence that surprised many people. She carried water, mended fences, cooked meals, and even visited town without fear. People began to notice her strength. Some supported her openly. Others whispered behind their hands, saying she should obey her father. But Elena didn't let those whispers shape her anymore. Caleb visited her homestead once, only when he was asked. Her father had gone to town, and Elena needed help lifting a hay bale that was too heavy for her. Caleb helped quickly and left before her father returned, not wanting to cause trouble. Word spread slowly about the situation. People waited to see what her father would do next. Some expected him to force her again. Others hoped he would understand. One thing was clear to everyone. Elena had changed. She stood taller. She spoke clearer. And she no longer hid her sadness behind small smiles. Caleb watched from a distance, feeling proud but cautious. He didn't want to interfere unless absolutely necessary. But he also knew he would step forward in a heartbeat if Elena ever needed protection again. For now, she was growing stronger on her own. And that was the most important thing of all. The days that followed moved quietly, almost gently, as if the world itself wanted Elena to breathe again after everything she had faced. The storm that had frightened the entire valley was gone, but its memory remained in everyone's mind, especially in Elena's. She had stood up for herself for the first time, and it had changed something inside her. Something strong had awakened. Her father did not speak much in the days after their argument. He still looked frustrated sometimes, confused other times, but he no longer raised his voice, and he no longer threatened to send her away. Instead, he watched her as she worked in the yard, as if trying to understand her anew. He saw how she fed the animals carefully, how she mended tools with steady hands, how she carried herself with quiet dignity. One evening, while Elena was sweeping the porch, her father stood in the doorway, silent for a moment. She looked up at him. Elena, he said, his voice softer than before. Come sit for a moment. She hesitated but then set the broom aside and sat down on the step. Her father sat beside her, something he hadn't done in a long time. The air felt calm, and the sun dipped slowly behind the hills, painting the sky with warm colors. I've been thinking, he said. Thinking about everything you said. Thinking about how I acted. Elena waited patiently. Her father lowered his head slightly. I was wrong to make decisions without hearing you. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I knew what life required. But I see now that I wasn't listening. His voice trembled with something she had never heard from him before, honesty mixed with regret. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Elena's eyes widened slightly. Her father rarely apologized. His pride had always been a wall too solid to break. But now, that wall had cracks. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Father. The silence between them felt lighter, not heavy like before. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. Her father cleared his throat. You are my daughter. I want you safe. I want you to have a future, but I also want you to find your own path. You're old enough now. He paused, then said softly, I won't force you anymore. Elena felt tears gather gently in her eyes, not tears of pain, but ones of relief. She didn't cry loudly. Instead, she breathed deeply, letting the moment settle in her heart. She whispered, I forgive you. Her father nodded slowly, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. That night, Elena slept peacefully for the first time in a long while. The next morning, she felt lighter, clearer. She went about her chores with quiet joy. She even hummed a little while, working something she hadn't done since childhood. The world around her seemed more open, as if the sky itself had widened. Meanwhile, on his ranch, Caleb Turner worked in silence, but his thoughts kept returning to Elena. He wondered if she was all right. He wondered if her father had calmed down. He wondered if she had found peace after standing up for herself. He tried to push those thoughts aside, but Elena had become a gentle echo in his mind. That afternoon, when Caleb was repairing his horse's saddle, he heard someone calling his name. Caleb. He looked up and saw Elena approaching on the trail, walking slowly but confidently. She held a small basket in her hands, and her expression carried both nervousness and calmness. Caleb stepped forward, surprised but glad. "Elena," he said. "You're here." She smiled softly. "I wanted to thank you." He raised a hand lightly. "You don't need to. I didn't do anything special." "Yes, you did," she said gently. "You searched for me in the storm. You protected me when I couldn't protect myself. And you listened." Caleb felt a warmth in his chest. He didn't know what to say, so he stayed quiet, letting her continue. She opened the basket slightly. "I brought some fresh bread. I baked it today. I thought, maybe you'd like some." He accepted the basket with a grateful nod. "Thank you. That's kind of you." They walked toward the fence together. The air was peaceful, and the wind moved softly through the grass. Elena leaned lightly on the wooden rail, looking out at his land. "I used to think I wasn't strong," she said quietly. "I used to think my voice didn't matter. But I was wrong. I found my courage when I needed it most." Caleb nodded. "Courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it stands quietly and refuses to fall." Elena smiled warmly. "I think I learned that from watching you." Caleb looked at her with gentle surprise. "Me? You don't talk much," she said. "You don't try to impress anyone. But you act when it matters. You helped me without expecting anything in return. And that taught me something important." He lowered his gaze slightly, humbled by her words. For a moment, they just stood there in quiet understanding. The world around them was simple fields, mountains, wind. But the moment felt full, meaningful. Elena looked down at her hands. "Father apologized last night," she said. "He finally understood. I forgave him. And now, I feel free in a way I've never felt before." Caleb felt relief wash over him. "I'm glad," he said softly. "You deserve peace." Elena lifted her eyes to his. "I'm going to choose my own path now. I want to work. I want to learn new things. I want to build a life that feels right to me." Caleb waited, sensing she had more to say. "And I want to stay close to the people who helped me find my strength," she continued. Caleb's heart gave a small, quiet stir. "You'll always have a place here," he said. "Not because you need help, but because you bring light wherever you go." Elena felt her cheeks warm, though she kept her smile soft. The afternoon sun made everything look golden. Birds flew low, and the horses grazed peacefully nearby. The air smelled of grass and earth, and something hopeful. Something like a new start. After a while, Caleb walked her back to the trail. She held the empty basket close to her side. "I don't know what the future holds," she said gently, "but for the first time, I'm not afraid." "And you shouldn't be," Caleb replied. "You've earned your freedom." She looked at him with warm, steady eyes. "You helped me believe in it." He nodded once, quietly. As she turned to leave, she paused and looked back. "Caleb, thank you. Truly." He tipped his hat slightly, a small smile touching his lips. "Anytime, Elena." She walked away slowly, her steps lighter than ever before. She didn't look like the girl who whispered in the trading post. She didn't look like the girl who trembled in the storm. She looked whole. She looked sure. She looked free. Caleb watched her until she disappeared over the small hill. Only then did he turn back to his ranch, feeling something warm settle deeply in him. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. He had witnessed a young woman reclaim her strength, her voice, and her life. And everything had changed the moment he heard her whisper. My father tried to decide my fate. Now, her fate was finally in her own hands.